Welcome everyone to our deep dive today, all about Greek tragedy.
Greek tragedy.
We're taking a look at a scholarly text on the topic.
Okay.
And believe me, you're going to be amazed by how these ancient plays performed thousands of years ago still have so much to say about the human experience.
It's true.
Let's jump right in.
Yeah, so what's really intriguing is how the rise of Greek tragedy is tied to the rise of Athens itself.
Okay.
You've got this period in the 5th century BC, the Golden Age of Athens,
Yeah.
where they're a major power after defeating the Persians.
So with all that power and wealth, they have the resources and the energy to really support the arts.
Exactly. Athens became the place for Greek drama.
Wow.
It was like a monopoly,
Okay.
but for theater.
For theater.
And this cultural explosion played out against a backdrop of intense political drama with the Peloponnesian War eventually leading to Athens' downfall.
Wow. Talk about a setting ripe for tragic stories.
Right.
But even before this Golden Age tragedy was already brewing in Athens.
That's right. And it all goes back to Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and ecstasy.
Okay, so we're talking about those wild celebrations with music, dancing, costumes, like a giant party.
More than just a party.
Oh, so-
These were rituals at the heart of Dionysus's worship.
Right.
And it's from these ecstatic rituals that Greek tragedy eventually emerged as a distinct art form.
That's incredible. So you're telling me that our modern concept of tragedy, with its themes of fate, suffering, and the human condition, has roots in ancient rituals dedicated to a god of wine and revelry.
It's a fascinating evolution. Even the word tragedy might come from tragos, which means goat.
Right.
Possibly a reference to sacrificial rituals associated with Dionysus.
Wow, that's a pretty wild origin story. But how did we get from rituals to the plays we know as tragedies?
Well, early on, there were these choral hymns called dithyrambs,
Okay.
performed in honor of Dionysus.
Yeah.
Then a key figure named Thespis came along.
Okay.
He was the first actor to step out from the chorus and actually engage in dialogue,
Oh, wow.
creating the first individual character.
So Thespis is like the OG of actors breaking away from the chorus and paving the way for individual characters and more complex stories.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift, and I bet it changed the whole experience for the audience.
Absolutely. This innovation required a change in the physical space, too.
Okay.
Evolution of storytelling went hand in hand with the development of the Greek theater itself.
Okay, so let's paint a picture for our listener.
Yeah.
Imagine yourself transported back in time, standing in an ancient Greek theater.
Okay.
It's open air, carved into a hillside, and thousands of people are gathering to witness these grand performances. What would you see?
You'd see a circular space called the orchestra where the chorus would perform singing and dancing.
Okay.
Then there's the skene, a building that served as a backdrop and provided entrances and exits for the actors.
Gotcha.
And of course, surrounding the orchestra, you have the theatron, those massive seating areas where the audience sat packed together, experiencing this shared ritual of storytelling.
And they weren't just watching, right? The audience was actively participating in the performance, responding to the actors and the chorus. It must have been a much more immersive and emotionally charged experience than going to the theater today.
You're right, and to further enhance that experience, there were masks and elaborate costumes.
So those masks weren't just for show.
Not at all. They served a practical purpose, too.
Okay.
They amplified the actors' voices, allowing them to be heard by everyone in that massive open-air theater. They also helped to convey emotions and create larger-than-life characters.
It's fascinating to think about how every aspect of the Greek theater, from the architecture to the costumes, was designed to create this incredibly powerful and immersive experience for the audience. But there's one element we haven't mentioned yet that really sets Greek tragedy apart.
You're talking about the chorus, right?
Yes. They played such a unique role. They weren't just background singers, they were commentators, offering insights, moral reflections, and emotional responses to the action on stage. They added this whole other layer of meaning to the play.
And they were often integrated into the story itself, representing the voice of the community, or even embodying abstract concepts like fate or justice. Imagine how powerful that would be, seeing these figures on stage voicing the hopes and fears of the people, grappling with moral dilemmas alongside the main characters.
It must have been incredibly moving. But I'm curious, how did the role of the chorus change over time? Did they always have this much influence on the play?
It's interesting you asked that the size and role of the chorus did evolve over time.
Great.
They became less prominent in later tragedies.
No.
But they always retained a unique presence, providing a bridge between the characters and the audience, adding a layer of commentary and reflection.
So even as tragedy evolved, that link to its ritualistic origins, that sense of communal experience remained.
Exactly. The chorus is a constant reminder of the roots of tragedy in those ancient rituals dedicated to Dionysus.
Okay, so we've talked about the chorus, the masks, the impressive setting, but what about the actors themselves? What was it like to perform in a Greek tragedy?
Well, it was definitely challenging. You had a limited number of actors, often just 2 or 3 on stage at a time.
Wow.
And they had to deliver these powerful performances while wearing masks,
Right.
which must have been incredibly difficult.
I can only imagine wearing a mask would restrict your facial expressions and your voice.
Right.
So you'd have to rely on your body language and vocal projection
Right.
to really convey the character's emotions.
Yeah.
Talk about a challenge.
Absolutely. And on top of that, there was the convention of not showing violence on stage. Any violent acts were typically reported by messengers, leaving the audience to imagine the horror.
That's so interesting. It seems counterintuitive to leave out such a dramatic element. Why do you think they chose to do that?
Instead of relying on visual spectacle,
Yeah.
they relied on the power of language and suggestion.
Okay.
This forced the audience to engage their imaginations and confront the emotional impact of the violence in a much more profound way.
You're right. It's like they're tapping into the power of suggestion, leaving the audience to fill in the blanks and create their own internal experience of the play.
Precisely. And it allowed the playwrights to focus on the psychological and moral implications of violence rather than on its physicality.
So it's not about avoiding the gruesome. It's about shifting the emphasis to the characters' internal struggles and the consequences of their actions. It's about those deeper, more universal themes that Greek tragedy is known for.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial element, the stories themselves.
Okay.
Greek tragedies drew their inspiration from myths and legends.
Right.
Familiar tales that resonated deeply with the audience. We're talking about stories like Oedipus Rex Agamemnon stories filled with gods, heroes, and tragic fates.
So these weren't just entertaining stories. They were cultural touchstones that carried a lot of weight for the audience.
Right.
But were playwrights simply rehashing these old tales, or were they doing something more with them?
They were doing much more. They were taking these familiar myths and adapting them, reinterpreting them to suit their own artistic purposes.
So it wasn't just about retelling the myth, it was about using it as a jumping-off point to explore contemporary issues and delve into deeper truth about the human condition.
Precisely. They were using these myths to explore timeless themes of fate, free will, hubris, and the very nature of human suffering.
Yeah.
Themes that are just as relevant to us today.
It's remarkable how these playwrights, living in a world so different from our own, managed to create works that still resonate with audiences centuries later.
And it's not just the themes. They also used innovative storytelling techniques like anachronism, intentionally introducing elements that didn't fit the historical setting of the myth.
So they were deliberately playing with time and history to create a certain effect. Why do you think they did that?
It allowed them to create a sense of immediacy, to connect with their audience on a more visceral level. By blending elements of their own time with these ancient myths, they were able to show how these timeless stories still had relevance to their own lives and to the lives of their audience.
So they weren't just interested in historical accuracy. They were using these myths as a framework to explore universal truths and connect with the audience on a deeper level. It's like they're saying, look, these ancient stories still have something to say about our lives today.
Exactly, and that's what makes Greek tragedy so enduringly powerful. It's not just about the spectacle or the dramatic narratives, it's about the way these plays grapple with fundamental questions about the human experience. Questions that we are still asking ourselves today.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to pause.
Okay,
We'll come back and pick up this conversation next time.
that's good.
See you then.
See you then.
You know, as we're talking about these enduring themes, it makes me wonder about the historical context in which these plays were written.
Yeah.
What was happening in Athens at the time that might have shaped these stories?
Well, remember that Athens was fresh off a victory against the Persians. This was a time of great pride and confidence for the city, but it also came at a cost.
So were the playwrights exploring the aftermath of war, the impact on society, the questions people were grappling with?
Absolutely. Greek tragedy often delves into themes of loss, suffering, and the fragility of human existence, themes that would have resonated deeply with an audience that had experienced the horrors of war firsthand.
And it wasn't just the Persian Wars, right? Athens was soon embroiled in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would ultimately lead to its downfall. That must have added another layer of complexity to the stories being told on stage.
Precisely, the Peloponnesian War created a climate of uncertainty and anxiety. People were questioning their leaders, their values, even their faith in the gods. These anxieties found expression in the tragedies of the time.
It's almost as if these plays were holding up a mirror to Athenian society, reflecting the hopes and fears of the people. They weren't just entertainment, they were a way for people to process the events shaping their world.
Yes, and within that context, the role of the chorus becomes even more fascinating. They often represented the voice of the community, expressing shared anxieties and grappling with those very same moral dilemmas.
So the chorus acted as a bridge between the characters on stage and the audience, creating a sense of shared experience and reflection.
Exactly, and that shared experience was so important. Remember, the Greek theater wasn't just a place to passively watch a play. It was a space for the community to come together, to engage in dialogue, and to confront difficult truths.
It sounds almost like a form of public therapy, a way for people to work through their collective trauma and search for meaning in the face of adversity.
That's a really insightful observation. It highlights the social and political significance of Greek tragedy. These plays weren't simply artistic expressions, they were deeply intertwined with the very fabric of Athenian society.
I'm struck by how art can serve such a vital function, providing a platform for exploring these societal issues and prompting reflection on the human condition. It makes you wonder what kinds of art we're creating today that will speak to future generations about our own struggles and triumphs.
It's a thought-provoking question, isn't it? But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's important to circle back to some of the specific conventions of Greek theater that we touched on earlier.
Yes, I agree. Some of these elements might seem strange or even archaic to a modern audience, but they were absolutely crucial to creating that immersive experience we've been talking about.
Let's start with the masks. As we mentioned before, actors wore masks to portray different characters, and these masks weren't just decorative, they served a very practical purpose.
Right. We talked about how the masks amplify the actors' voices, making them audible to those huge audiences gathered in the open-air theater, and they also help convey emotions and character traits, essentially taking the place of facial expressions.
Exactly. The masks, combined with the actors' movements and vocal delivery, created larger-than-life characters that commanded the attention of the audience. It was a very stylized form of acting, but incredibly powerful in its own way.
And then there's the convention of not showing violence on stage, which still seems so unusual to me. Instead, messengers would recount violent acts, leaving the audience to imagine the horror.
It might seem counterintuitive to leave out such a dramatic element, but remember, this was a culture steeped in ritual and symbolism. They weren't interested in presenting a realistic depiction of violence. They wanted to explore its psychological and moral implications.
So by not showing the violence directly, they were actually forcing the audience to engage their imaginations and confront the emotional impact of those acts in a much more profound way.
Precisely, they were tapping into the power of suggestion, allowing the audience to fill in the blanks and create their own internal experience of the play. And this approach also allowed the playwrights to focus on the deeper themes we talked about earlier: fate, free will, justice, the nature of suffering.
It's fascinating how those choices, which might seem strange to us today, were so deliberate and served a very specific purpose in enhancing the storytelling and deepening the audience's emotional connection to the play.
And it speaks to the ingenuity and artistry of these playwrights. They weren't just putting on a show, they were creating a multi-layered sensory experience designed to provoke thought and emotion.
Absolutely. It was a truly holistic approach to storytelling, encompassing not just the narrative, but the music, the movement, the costumes, the very architecture of the theater itself.
And this brings us back to the use of myths and legends as the source material for these tragedies. Remember, these myths weren't just stories, they were cultural touchstones that held deep meaning for the audience.
Right, these myths were already loaded with symbolic significance, and the playwrights were able to tap into that using those familiar stories to explore contemporary issues and universal truths.
They weren't afraid to take liberties with the original myths, adapting them and reinterpreting them to suit their own artistic purposes. And remember that concept of anachronism we talked about. Sometimes they would intentionally introduce elements that didn't fit the historical setting of the myth.
It seems like they are constantly innovating, pushing the boundaries of storytelling and finding new ways to connect with their audience.
They were masters of their craft, blending tradition and innovation to create a truly unique and powerful art form. And it's that mastery that explains why, even thousands of years later, Greek tragedy continues to resonate with audiences across cultures.
It's a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, its ability to connect us across time and culture, and to help us grapple with those timeless questions about the human experience.
Exactly. And that's what makes these plays so fascinating to study. They offer a window into the minds and hearts of people who lived in a very different time, but they also hold up a mirror to our own lives and struggles.
I'm curious from your perspective, what's the most crucial takeaway for our listener? What should they keep in mind as they delve into the world of Greek tragedy?
I think the key is to approach these plays with an open mind and a willingness to engage with the unfamiliar. Don't be put off by the conventions of Greek theater, no matter how strange they might seem. Remember that these conventions served a purpose, and they were crucial to creating that powerful and immersive experience for the audience.
It's like learning a new language, right? Like once you understand the grammar and vocabulary, you can appreciate the beauty and complexity of the literature.
That's a great analogy, and don't forget the historical and cultural context. These plays were written in a specific time and place, and understanding that context can enrich your appreciation of the themes they explore.
Absolutely. And most importantly, don't be afraid to connect these ancient stories to your own life and experiences. The themes of love loss, betrayal, ambition, and the search for meaning are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago.
Exactly. Greek tragedy might seem distant and unfamiliar, but the truth is these plays offer profound insights into the human condition that are just as relevant and resonant today as they were in ancient Athens.
As we've been discussing the conventions and historical context of Greek tragedy, I can't help but wonder how different the actual experience of watching one of these plays would have been compared to, say, going to a movie today.
It's a great point. Attending a Greek tragedy wasn't just a form of entertainment, it was a communal event, a civic ritual. Thousands of people gathered in the open air under the sun, experiencing this intense emotional journey together.
Yeah, it's almost like you can feel the energy of that shared experience, that collective gasp when a character meets their tragic fate.
Exactly. And remember, these tragedies weren't just one-off performances. They were part of grand festivals competitions where playwrights would submit their works and compete for prizes.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just about the art itself. There was a sense of civic pride of competition even.
Absolutely. The city Dionysia, held in honor of Dionysus, was the most prestigious of these festivals. Winning a prize there brought honor not only to the playwright, but to the entire city they represented.
So imagine the pressure on these playwrights, knowing that they were representing their city on this grand stage, competing against the best of the best. It must have pushed them to create truly innovative and compelling works.
It's incredible to think about how these plays functioned on so many different levels as entertainment, as religious ritual, as social commentary, and as a platform for exploring those profound questions of human existence that we've been discussing.
And what's amazing is that even with all these layers of meaning, these plays still manage to speak to us across the centuries. There's something about the themes, the characters, the way they grapple with those universal struggles that transcends time and culture.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling and to the genius of these playwrights who are able to tap into something essential about the human experience.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, is there anything you would say is absolutely essential for our listener to keep in mind as they venture into the world of Greek tragedy?
I think the most important thing is to remember that Greek tragedy emerged from ritual, specifically the worship of Dionysus. That connection is key to understanding not just the structure of the plays, but also their themes and their emotional impact.
Right, and of course we can't forget the unique role of the chorus, who add a layer of commentary, insight, and emotional resonance that you simply wouldn't find in modern theater.
And don't forget the historical and cultural context. These plays were written for a specific audience in a specific time and place. Understanding that context can deepen your appreciation of the themes and the choices the playwrights made.
It's like having a key that unlocks another layer of meaning in the text.
Exactly. But ultimately, I think the most rewarding way to experience Greek tragedy is to connect with it on a personal level, to think about how the themes these plays explore resonate with your own life and your own understanding of the world.
Because even though these plays were written thousands of years ago, they're still grappling with questions that are relevant to us today. Questions about fate, free will, justice, the nature of suffering.
Precisely. And by engaging with those questions, by allowing ourselves to be challenged and moved by these ancient stories, we can gain a deeper understanding not just of ourselves, but of the human condition itself.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the origins of Greek tragedy to its conventions, its themes, and its enduring legacy. I hope our listener now has a deeper appreciation for this incredibly rich and rewarding art form.
And perhaps even a desire to explore some of these plays on their own. There's a whole world of powerful stories and profound insights waiting to be discovered.
So go ahead, take the plunge. Who knows? You might even be inspired to stage your own production. Just remember to keep those masks handy and leave the violence off stage.
And don't forget the chorus. They're the heart and soul of Greek tragedy.
On that note, we'll bid you farewell. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Greek tragedy.